Me, Leo Kearse. It's now time to go through the winners and losers of the week in Kearse versus Blessed. The main suspect of the stabbing spree at a festival of diversity in Germany recently has been reported to be a Syrian refugee. He targeted people's throats, killing 3 people and seriously wounding 8 others. The worst thing about this is that because it's a festival of diversity, victims might have thought he was the headline act. Oh, they've got immersive street theatre showing the downsides of diversity. That's unexpected. What was expected, however, was that the police didn't release a description of the man, even though he was on the run, so he was still a threat to the public, despite witnesses giving a description of him to the press. So the police could have circulated that description. So we all knew straight away it was an Islamic extremist, because the police said it was just a man, just a generic man with no distinguishable features that might help you identify him. I also knew that within hours the mainstream media would have worked out a way to blame the supposed far right. I even posted, watch the media cycle. Within hours it'll be far right bigots exploit acceptable situation for their evil anti-getting stabbed in the neck agenda. I mean, never mind the relentless stream of people being stabbed in the neck and killed. The real problem is those horrible bigots who want to stop people being stabbed in the neck. A Sky News guest said he was worried about how it could be used by people on the far right to stir up hatred, although he has since distanced himself from those comments. The Financial Times ran this headline: why Germany's stabbing attack has rekindled the EU's far-right fears. Yeah, being worried about getting stabbed in the neck is now far-right, apparently. Politico wailed, German far-right seizes on knife attack ahead of crucial state elections. Now, do you think that if this terrorist was motivated by the far-right, the media would be tiptoeing around the issue and warning that the real problem is this being used by the far-left? Of course not. I mean, Reem, I thought they're almost becoming banal. These attacks, stabbing attacks, particularly in Germany, there's so many Islamist stabbing attacks, but the media response is becoming so predictable and so ridiculous.
It is so predictable, you're absolutely right. And I think it's so tragic, isn't it? The fact that we can't then look at these particular situations and identify somebody on the basis that they might be coming across as being accused of being racist. This exact same thing happened with the grooming gangs in the UK. The reason why the police failed to investigate early on is because they were afraid of being accused of being racist. Yeah. And I think that there seems to be this fear of backlash. Of course, we know with the Southport killings in the UK that person ended up not being an asylum seeker. But there are various different issues here. Whoever they are, and no matter where they come from, I don't care. This particular person has attempted or has indeed hurt somebody physically, and I don't care where they come from, but they need to be identified so that they could be found even further. As you said earlier on, I think that the fact that this particular person was still a threat to the public and they weren't being identified by the police is just absurd, and it is genuinely quite scary where we are going at the moment. And
I read a report that said that I believe the government services tried to deport him, tried to find him, but they legally weren't allowed to search his asylum accommodation, so he was still in the country. And obviously, you know, people have been fearing that it's going to lead to the rise of the far right. But the far right seem to be the only people willing to do anything about the constant stream of people coming into the country. Obviously, most of whom, you know, aren't going to stab anybody in the neck. But you know, this was a Syrian man who was in Germany but hates Germans so much he wanted to stab them. I don't understand why. You know, what's the benefit to Germany of having him in Germany?
Well, I mean, like I say, if the police aren't going to do anything, then what are people to do but try and find a way to defend themselves? I mean, I'm not sort of justifying any kind of racist attacks or anything like that, but yeah, I mean, people are going to feel scared and unprotected. But do you remember that Norm Macdonald?
People are unprotected.
Yeah, they are, for sure. Do you remember that Norm Macdonald tweet?
Yeah.
Well, I can't remember, but it's about, like, the nukes or something.
Yeah, he says what he's afraid of most. You know, imagine if ISIS detonated a nuclear bomb and killed 50 million Americans. Imagine the backlash against peaceful Muslims. And that was a satirical tweet, but it seems to be informing the media response in 2024. It's ridiculous. Anyway, there was a glimpse into Britain's future as an authoritarian socialist state this week as Brazil shut down Twitter, also known as X. The Brazilian Supreme Federal Court Justice Alexandra de Moraes ordered the immediate and complete suspension of the social media platform owned by Elon Musk. The row began in April with the judge ordering the suspension of dozens of X accounts for what the establishment in Brazil say is spreading disinformation. However, Others say the left-wing Brazilian establishment is censoring the Brazilian right-wing opposition without due process, trials, or even warrants, under accusations of fake news. There's also a reminder of how the left force social media platforms to spread disinformation when they're in power. As Mark Zuckerberg says, the Biden administration officials pressured Meta to censor content during the pandemic, and big tech has censored other valid news on behalf of left-wing governments. As the New York Post reported, the Washington ruling class, including career intelligence officials, the media and big tech, plotted well in advance to suppress and discredit the fully authentic and legitimate Hunter Biden laptop story, solely for the purpose of influencing the 2020 election. Now, Jonathan, I feel like this week we've had Pavel Durov, the founder of Telegram, arrested. Mm-hmm. We've had Musk threatened by the EU, and now Brazil banning Twitter. It feels like there's real restrictions being put on free speech on the internet.
Absolutely, and the worry is how far is this going to go? I mean, you think this kind of thing wouldn't happen over here, but then we're seeing people arrested and thrown in prison for tweets and for jokes, and you do worry this going to come to our shores. I mean, I hope not, because your Twitter is basically what I need to get me rolled up in the morning. If I can't do any push-ups, I'll read your Twitter.
It's mental. I'm going to say something a little bit optimistic here.
Yeah.
Now, I know this is a very terrible story, and this is clearly a case of an authoritarian zealot taking too much of this power. However, one thing I will say is that technological advancements and the rise of social media and the impact that it has had on so many people across the world means that actually it is becoming increasingly difficult for governments to censor anything. Mm-hmm. So, of course, we know that X has been banned in Brazil, but there are other social media platforms, and I guarantee that many people will be able to get onto the sort of black market of the internet illegally.
But they're threatening fines of, I think it's about $8,000 if anybody accesses Twitter or X through a VPN, so through something that would allow you to access it.
Yeah, it's disgusting and it's authoritarian, it's disgraceful. But I do feel optimistic about the fact that social media and these kind of private initiatives have actually allowed people to resist authoritarian regimes. Mm-hmm. I mean, a really good example.
Look at the Arab Spring.
Absolutely. For those who don't know, I'm half Egyptian, half Moroccan, and on my Egyptian side, we talk about this all the time, about the impact of the Arab Spring. In Egypt, the revolution was actually dubbed the Facebook Revolution because the protests and the organisers were actually using social media platforms like Facebook in order to organise the protests, which were fundamentally against an authoritarian regime. Yeah. Very similar things actually happened. The Arab Spring started in Tunisia after the government effectively took away the license, or said that this guy didn't have a license, Mohammed Bouazizi, that he didn't have a license for his fruit stall, and so the police seized it from him. So he set himself on fire in protest of that. Right. He set himself on fire in protest of an authoritarian regime, and that spurred, it was the catalyst for protests across all of North Africa. Yeah. These protests, the government will try and ban them and try and restrict them, but social media allowed them to have the freedom to do so. Yeah. And that's why I feel a bit more optimistic.
And also, people in the West, with the Oasis revival, are some of our politicians trying to relive the glorious days of Britpop. Angela Rayner was seen having it large in a DJ booth in a club in Ibiza in front of a crowd of drugged-up punters. Big fish, little fish, cardboard box. Boris was also reliving the glory years of baggy trousers and white doves, posting this video speaking about his fears for freedom of speech and looking like the keyboard player from the Inspiral Carpets who slept in a hedge.
In Kearse SLAMS Britain, I'm worried, for the first time in my life, about freedom of speech. I mean, the freedom of everybody to say what they innocently think, even if it turns out not to be true, and the freedom of people to use ordinary English words about subjects like illegal immigration when they know that they're telling the truth.
He really does look like Clint Boone from the Inspiral Carpets if Clint Boone got into pies instead of playing keyboards. Now, I share Boris's fears over freedom of speech and Keir Starmer's authoritarian ambitions. He's banned smoking outside pubs, or he's thinking about banning smoking outside pubs, just as Reem said, which isn't in the spirit of cigarettes and alcohol. But Boris is the man who oversaw the creation of the Online Safety Bill, which is the legislation that Keir Starmer is going to use to police the internet and restrict our freedoms. Now, back to my panel. Jonathan, you were going to say something probably funny.
Yeah, although the moment's passed now. So
that's fine, we'll just pretend.
OK, what was I going to say? Something about Boris. being probably naked from the waist down from that video. That's all I can think of. But, yeah, so it's a bit much coming from him, as you say, somebody who drafted or put forward the online safety bill, now very concerned.
Maybe not personally, but it happened on his watch.
Yeah.
And Reem, you work for a think tank that exhorts the values of free markets and free speech. I mean, are you worried that the clampdown on free speech is also going to affect the economy? Because if you can't think freely, if you can't discuss ideas freely, you can't express yourself freely, that also, has an impact on the free market.
It does. I'm really quite terribly concerned about the threat to freedom of expression in this country. Under existing legislation, so any laws that are going to be implemented under a Labour government are entirely separate. Under existing legislation, we've already seen institutions use it against us. So, for example, Thames Valley Police said back in 2019 that anybody that was to reproduce the Oxford English Dictionary definition of what a woman is, an adult human female, could be arrested. They could be liable to criminal damages. So this notion...
So by reproducing the Oxford English Dictionary...
by saying an adult human female, you can be arrested. Yeah, it's mental. It's literally mental. This is the kind of thing we're seeing in the UK happening already under existing legislation. You mentioned the online safety bill. There was so much work that we at the IEA did on this, but effectively they were looking at language like psychological harms.
Yeah.
So if I decided that what you just said psychologically harmed me, entirely subjective, if I decided that, I could then take you to court and actually get you prosecuted under this bill. It is absolutely absurd. I'm really quite afraid for the future of freedom in general in this country, but definitely the future of freedom of expression. There's also the point to make, and Margaret Thatcher spoke about this all the time when she was Prime Minister, that the best way you get to the best ideas is by weeding out the bad ones. And you must have a marketplace of ideas. You must allow people to say the most outrageous things so that we know what outrageous things look like. You have to allow people to say the most grotesque and horrendous things.
Well,
otherwise...
I hope it's not a bad sign, but Keir just took down her portrait, so...
Yes. Well, if that is definitely an anecdote and a sort of microcosm for what the future of this country might look like.
And
no chicks.
It seems to be communist states. Exactly. Margaret Thatcher was the first female leader of the country, and Keir Starmer
to be fair,
takes her portrait down.
He did replace the portrait with a picture of Diane Abbott as a mermaid. I made the same joke on Headliners last night. Don't watch both shows. Whatever you do. I'm a hack.
But we're seeing laws come in, particularly around speech, that are so vague. As Reem says, they're so nebulous and poorly defined. This idea that causing psychological harm, but they can't define what that actually means. So everybody could possibly be guilty of breaking that law. And this is what communist regimes have done. They create a law that everybody could be seen to have broken, so then everybody lives in fear of that law, and the state can pick and choose
You
who
find
it
me the
punishes.
man, I'll show you the crime.
Exactly.
As comedians, are you afraid of freedom of expression being entirely stamped down in this country? I mean, effectively, your job is more difficult,
There's
right?
already comedians being investigated under hate speech laws. Reginald D. Hunter was investigated, Jerry Sadowitz, and these are comedians on the left. So, Lord knows what they're going to do to me. Anyway, coming up,
Off to the